Good morning. Laura Donnelly here from Dancing with Ease, Body Brain Balance. And today is another healing path. And my guest today is Daniela Cook, and she's going to be talking about childhood food allergies. And I find this pretty interesting because teaching children, you can really, my least favorite days were Valentine's Day and Halloween when everybody wanted to bring candy to school. That just made my whole day a lot more challenging. So I'm very happy that she will be here today. And uh, we're new friends. We met online and had a chat and got excited about what each other does. And so this is one of the wonderful things about the internet and healing is that we have access to people who are in many places around the world. But the primary focus of these conversations and the work I do and the people I resonate with is that everybody starts from this idea that healing starts within ourselves, with us first, and then expands out into the world. And sometimes it can turn into a business. And I will let Daniela share her story and we'll just have a little conversation. And I'll bring her on the screen now. Hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I love what you do.
Thank you. And I love this. I mean, it's like supper time where you are, right?
Yes, it is.
It's breakfast time for me.
Well, that's the beauty of this. We can be anywhere, anytime. It all works.
And we can find information, which I think is really helpful. And I think people with children who have food allergies and things, that this is a really challenging thing. And I know you have multiple children, and so how to deal with multiple children who might have various needs or special cooking for one child and how to incorporate that into the whole family.
Yeah, it was definitely challenging. And when I first started this, I didn't really know anything about food allergy. I mean, I knew they existed, but I mean, I'm sure if you think back to your childhood days, how many kids did you know that had food allergies?
Zero.
Exactly. I had one child at school with me that had a nut allergy, and one at university with me which had a bee allergy, and that was it. That's for the first 25 years of my life, that's all I knew. And then I became a mum, and things changed. So I think before we dive into sort of how to deal with it with each one, I'll just give you a little bit of background. So I'm now a functional medicine certified health coach, and I have a background in naturopathic nutrition. And I'm the founder of Positive Health Space, which is an online coaching practice where I focus on helping parents of children with neurodevelopmental issues like autism, ADHD, or special educational needs. And this is a passion of mine because I really do think that food can have such a huge impact on our kids. But also because before all of these certifications and this job and this practice, I was just a mum, and I had 3 beautiful kids and 2 stepchildren, so 5 altogether. Kept me busy. And one night out of the blue, my youngest, she was 18 months at the time, she stopped breathing. And it was really, really scary. I'm sure I don't need to explain it. And her lungs nearly collapsed that night. She was taken into hospital. She was hospitalized for 3 days, and they sent us home after 3 days telling us she'd had a virus and she'd be absolutely fine, but they gave us some steroids to take home with us. And I was so glad that they did that, because unfortunately, whatever it was that she had, it kept happening, and she kept having these episodes where she would stop breathing. And it became like every couple of weeks, and it was very scary. And we started choosing where we lived based on where the nearest hospital was, which was no fun at all. And it had an effect on the whole family, because obviously we were terrified of leaving her alone. And as she got a little bit older, she sort of only got worse, really. She had no energy. She couldn't run around. She started having flares where all her joints would swell up. And so eventually she was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease. And she still had these episodes of breathing episodes, which nobody could quite understand. And of course, the only avenue we had was steroids. And by the time she was 3.5, she was a shadow of her former self. She had to take a 3-hour nap in the afternoon to survive the 3 hours she spent at nursery. She wouldn't run around on the playground. She would always sit next to me. And I remember the other parents saying, oh, how lucky I was that I didn't have to run after her, because they couldn't sit still. And she was my third child and effectively fifth child. So I'd seen, what kids are like at 3, and they shouldn't be like that. And so I didn't feel lucky. I felt frustrated and upset. And she also couldn't balance, and she struggled focusing. And generally we had spoken, by this time we've spoken to doctors in 5 countries, 3 continents, and they all agree that we have the best protocol available, and basically it's mostly steroids. And I think that's when I kind of realized that she wasn't getting any better. She may have been on the best protocol available, but she wasn't getting better. She was actually getting worse. And I decided in that moment that if she was ever going to get better, I had to do something about it. It had to come from us. It wasn't going to come from the outside. And when I set off, I didn't really, we call it healing, but healing is a very big word, and it means a lot of different things. And I wasn't expecting a cure, but I was hoping that she would not be defined by her disease. She would be able to lead as good a life as was possible for her. I didn't want her to not have choices because of whatever this thing was. And so basically I wanted to give her the best chance she had. And that's when I went back to school and started studying nutrition, and the rest is history. And eventually that led us to our first elimination diet, where within 10 days, I kid you not, 10 days, I had a different child. All of a sudden, she had color in her cheeks. For the first time ever, she was balancing on the edge of the sidewalk with her brothers and sisters. She was naughty all of a sudden. I realized what having a third child meant. She was full of energy, and it was a completely different child. My mum arrived within 3 weeks of us starting this diet, and she looked at me and she said, what have you done to her? It was like unrecognizable. And within a month, she was off all of her medications. So if you think that she had a bedside table full of prescription and non-prescription medication, she was off of all of them. And ever since that very first elimination diet, she has never, ever had to use a nebulizer. And that was 10 years ago, touch wood. And since then, she's only ever been sick enough to go on to antibiotics once.
Wow.
Now, I'd love to tell you that first elimination diet was the solution to everything and it healed her. It didn't, but it was the first step. It was the first step where I realized that food did make a difference and that certain foods were particularly bad for her. Now, at this point, I didn't know which. And that takes us nicely into what you asked me to begin with, because knowing nothing, I put all my children on the same elimination diet. I decided that everybody was going to do this. And oh my goodness, was it hard.
Oh,
Because convincing one toddler is one thing, and convincing two primary school children is a completely other thing. And we're not even going to mention the husband. Um, so yeah, it was hard. And I think whilst I do believe that doing it as a family is definitely important, it's important for the child and it's important for other people to realize, what's going on. I do think that sometimes working with one child at a time is maybe less overwhelming for the family, because the children don't always have the same allergies or need the same things. And so you can end up really in a situation where you just don't know where to look first. So just do it one at a time until you sort of get your bearings. And then once you know what you're doing, then it will become second nature. But, I don't even have to think now, but I do remember the days when I cried in my kitchen, very much so. So, yeah. But the amazing thing was that, the good thing about doing it for all the kids at the same time was that my other kids, I didn't think there was anything wrong with them. But when they went on this diet because of their baby sister, one of them used to be quite irritable and feisty, I think is a nice way of putting it. Um, and she would get these rashes that came out of nowhere and then went away, and they weren't a big problem, so nobody actually worried about them. And doctors said, though, they were just viral and nothing to worry about. And they disappeared, and she suddenly became much calmer. And my son, who has special educational needs, and that's where this passion then I followed, he was seeing an occupational therapist who was amazed by the change in him. And she was like, what have you done to him? And I was like, I've not done anything. And I didn't actually, for about a month, I didn't put two and two together. And it's only when she specifically asked me about the diet that I said, yeah, actually, I have changed his diet. And he had suffered from migraines from the age of 7. They disappeared. He used to have mouth ulcers. They disappeared. And his learning difficulties, they didn't go away, but they were a lot easier to manage when he was avoiding certain foods.
That's amazing. It's really, and it really is a journey. It's,
yeah,
what you said too is that you wished you could say the first elimination diet solved everything, but it was the first step, and
yeah,
this is part of the thing. And also healing. What is healing? Being able to manage our differences skillfully. That's, for me, is one definition of healing.
yeah.
And like growing up, I didn't know right from left. And always in school, when I grew up, they said, raise your right hand. So I started wearing a ring on my left hand. And when they would say, raise your right hand, I would immediately feel my fingers. And the one without the ring is the one I put up. I got really fast at that. So was I healed from not knowing right and left? No.
No, you just learn to cope.
I found a successful tool that allowed me to appear that I knew right from left.
Yeah, and that's really important for people to realize, because my daughter, her autoimmune disease is in remission. So for all intents and purposes, with any testing that she has done with the doctors, she no longer shows up as being, her test results do not warrant a diagnosis anymore, because all of her markers are back in range. It took us 6 years to do that. Does that mean she's healed? Does that mean she's cured? No. If she starts doing the things that upset her system, we will go straight back to where we were. It's still in her. It's still, part of her. It's just that we found a way to keep it at bay. And I think that's really important for people to understand. We're not, in a way it's a miracle. She can now breathe by herself, but there is a lot of work that went into that, and that work has to continue forever. It's not just a magic wand. So it's important for people to understand.
Very important. And that this is a process. and
Mm-hmm.
an ongoing process. If it's been 10 years and she's 13, she's probably just starting to move into puberty. And that can have all kinds of changes. Well, it does
Yeah.
have all kinds of chemical changes,
Yeah.
hormonal changes within your body that require observation.
Fine tuning.
Yes, and fine tuning, observation and fine tuning. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean things are going to go off the rails or anything. It just means if something that always worked isn't quite working right now,
Mm-hmm.
let's check what's happening.
Yeah, and you have to remember that around this age, the peer pressure starts becoming much stronger. They want to do things on their own and they're more independent. They start eating out more. And so, by definition, they start eating less good quality food. And so, that all has an effect. And, unfortunately, we can't stop them living. So, we have to find ways of managing and countering what is happening. And so, what I've always taught my kids, and some people in my field sort of feel that that's not the right thing to do because we have to be holier than holy, but I personally think that it's better to teach my kids how to counter the effect of the life and the reality that they're living, rather than telling them that they can't do anything that their friends are doing. And so my reality is that my kids do occasionally go to McDonald's with their friends. Much as I don't like it, much as I don't think it's healthy, they do. And so rather than fight with them, we have a rule that if they will eat fast food, be it McDonald's or anything else, then that day they have to have 2 extra servings of vegetables at dinner time or whatever it is. They have to make it up somehow. So explain to them that the body needs certain things to be able to work. The body is like a big machine, and it needs all the fuel, specific fuel that it needs to work. And whilst we have a lot of foods available to us, not all foods are created equal. And some foods give your body this fuel, and some foods actually take fuel out of your body. Why? Because your body has to deal with whatever comes into it. So anything that you put in your body, the body has to process. In order to process it, it needs fuel. So if it's processing something that it's going to get something out of, then you've given your body something back. If it's processing something that is going to get very little out of, if anything, then you've given your body a job to do, but you haven't given it the fuel to actually do the job. And that's what I try to teach the kids, because they need to understand what their actions are doing. Because just telling them you can't have that, that's not going to fly. Certainly not with today's kids. I mean, it may have worked with you and me when we were little, because we just, kids were to be seen and not heard. But not today's kids. They have ideas. They have their own way of thinking. They're all about fairness. So it's not going to fly. And even if you think it's flying in front of you, they're doing it behind your back. So I'd much rather them understanding and knowing how to deal with their issues. And then there are things that are non-negotiable. Like for my daughter, that's gluten. That's non-negotiable. If she eats gluten, she will go back to being sick. And that's just the way it is. Did we manage to do it overnight? No, even I was in denial that was what was going on, because it's difficult. But so there are a few things that for certain children are non-negotiable, and then there is the rest which is negotiable. And it's much better for them to learn ways of coping rather than just have, oh, you can't do that, all your friends will do it, but you can't. I think it's not healthy for them emotionally.
Right. And you give them the information to make intelligent choices and intelligent decisions. And that's empowering. And what's really also nice is that when I was growing up, there was only a few things you could get at McDonald's, but now you can get a salad. Well, no,
Yeah,
you can buy a salad at McDonald's. I mean, it's maybe not the best salad on the face of the earth,
yeah,
but if all your friends are going to McDonald's after a movie, you can go to McDonald's and you can pick something that is going to be perhaps less.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you see, I can see maybe my 16-year-old doing that. I don't see my 13-year-old doing that.
There, yeah,
It comes with time.
yeah, the choice for
Yeah.
time. And yeah, but I still think starting with information, I mean, and
Yeah.
giving them some opportunities to make mistakes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
and then we rebalance. I mean, it's not about, like you said, like, okay, well, we're going to put you in this box and you're going to be just fine in this box, but you can't do all the things outside the box.
Mm.
But what you're talking about is, well, we can't control everything, but if this happens, this is how we get back in balance.
Yeah. Yeah.
If this other thing happens, then we have a protocol or a process to follow to restore balance. It's it's like a moving thing.
Yeah. Where that doesn't quite work is like when we're actually starting the process, because then you have to be really strict. But once you've gotten to where you want to be, then you need to start experimenting with how you can maintain it. And that's the process that I'm in with my 13-year-old now, because she's gonna, start having her own outings and a little bit of independence. And I need to keep an eye on what's going on and see how that happens. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was food allergies, and I think it's important also for people to understand the difference between allergies, intolerances, and sensitivities, because everybody uses the terms interchangeably, but actually they're not the same thing, and that makes a difference to what your child can and can't do um, when you're doing this process. So if you think of the immune system as the armed forces, so it has lots of different branches, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and so on. And every part of the immune system has a job to do. And when you come in contact with something the body doesn't like or think of as an invader, what happens is that you produce antibodies. And these antibodies represent the different parts of the, the armed forces. Okay, so you have IgE, IgM, IgD, IgA, IgG, all these different types of antibodies. Now, when you have a food allergy, that's usually measured with a blood test or a skin prick test. And what they're testing for is IgE. And that is what is known as a true allergy. And it's something where you see a reaction, usually within 2 hours, and the reaction is quite serious. And there is a risk of anaphylaxis, which is basically when you get anaphylaxis, when the throat closes, and there is the risk of death. Normally, children that have real true allergies or IgE allergies, they may carry an EpiPen, which is an adrenaline shot that helps them get to the hospital to get the help that they need. True allergies are considered like peanut allergies, the bee stings, they're the shellfish. They're like the very common true allergies. That doesn't mean that it can't be other things, but these are the most recognized ones. So, and that's why schools, I don't know about schools in the US, but schools here, you can't bring any nuts to school. That's just not allowed. So these are what doctors recognize as allergies, traditional medicine recognizes as allergies, and they are one type of immune reaction. Then you have sensitivities, which are also an immune reaction. And usually when you do a food sensitivity test, they're testing for IgG or IgA. Okay. The difference between this and the true allergy, so a sensitivity is still an immune reaction, but it could take up to 3 days to show up. So it's not so easy to find out what it is. It could be to a variety of things. It's normally, it's usually foods, but it could also be chemicals. And although it's very rare, it can have serious implications like the true allergies, but it's not usually the case. And the tricky thing about them is that they can cause or contribute to other diseases in the body in the long run. Okay, so they are still quite serious. An intolerance is not an immune reaction. It's just a digestive chemistry problem. So when you're digesting foods, you should have chemicals and enzymes in your digestive tract that break down the food that you're eating. So think of the enzymes as scissors that cut the food into small, tiny little pieces so that your body can absorb it. And what happens is that maybe you don't have enough scissors, and so you're not digesting your food properly. Okay, and that is what an intolerance is. And most of the time, if you correct the digestive process, then you can probably eat that food again.
That is so cool to have that definition.
So that's like, I mean, it's very simplified, but
yes, but it's a starting place for people. Because I'm thinking if you have a sensitivity and you don't know you have a sensitivity, and you repeatedly eat the food that causes a certain kind of response in your system, say it's a headache, say it's sinus stuff, because you don't know what's causing it, you continue to eat that substance, and so you continue to have the problem, and maybe the problem gets bigger. You know, like say you have a sinus headache and you don't whatever, and then your sinuses get clogged, then they get infected, then you have a sinus infection, and you go down that whole route.
Do you want me to explain how that happens?
Sure. I think it's okay. I mean, I think the whole body is interesting. So whatever I learn about the body is something fun for me.
So basically, because that's the other thing that's confusing. People go for a food intolerance test, and they're testing IgG.
Oh.
When you look at the test is IgG, and so you're thinking, okay, is it an intolerance? Is it a sensitivity? So think of your digestive tract like a hose. Think of it as a garden hose. Okay, so if I gave you a raisin right now and you swallowed it, where is that raisin?
Well, it has to go down my throat and my stomach, and then it.
Yeah. So is it inside your body?
I would think so. It's inside. Okay. It's inside the digestive canal, which actually is open at both ends.
Exactly, like the garden hose. Like the garden hose. So once you've swallowed something, it's inside the garden hose, inside your digestive tract, but it's not inside the body, because your digestive tract is part of your first line of defense. And so it's lined with this IgA, one of the branches of the immune system, to protect you. And it makes sure that, and it's also, so these IgA are like, think of them like bodyguards or bouncers. They don't let anything into the body unless it's been cut into like little pieces. So if you think of a piece of meat as a pearl necklace, the enzymes, the scissors, they have to cut it into individual pearls for the body to absorb. Okay, so let's assume that you don't digest your food properly, and so the food doesn't get cut up into single pearls. Maybe you have like clumps of 3 or 4 pearls, or you get a little bracelet, or it just doesn't, it's not working properly. So initially you might have like some bloating or some discomfort, and the food sits in there, and eventually it causes an imbalance in all of the bacteria that are living in the gut, because all of these bacteria, they do different jobs, and their jobs depend on what we're eating. So if they're not getting if the right bacteria are not getting the right foods, then you will create an imbalance. This garden hose, which is your digestive tract, is lined by a layer of cells, which is a single layer. So it's really, really, really easy to disrupt. And think of this layer as basically the body building a protection with like Lego bricks. Okay. When you've got food, so they're all sitting nicely flush one against the other. When you've got food sitting in there, not being digested and fermenting, it might cause some inflammation or some disturbance. And the inflammation means that these cells that are around there, maybe they will swell up. And now the body has to create a barrier instead of with Lego bricks, with little balloons. So if you imagine a visual of a wall made of balloons, there's lots of little holes in between. It's no longer flush. And so now these pearls, these clumps of pearls, are managing to get through the intestine and into the bloodstream, where another part of your immune system is sitting. And this part of the immune system is only used to seeing the single pearl, because the other bit of the bouncers shouldn't have let anything else in. So they don't recognize these. And now they're attacking them. And so you've gone from having a food intolerance to possibly a food sensitivity. And that's what's being measured in that test. But does it mean you have a sensitivity? Not necessarily, because if you correct the issue in the digestive tract, that may resolve itself. So what has happened is, and I'm using food intolerance because that's what we started with, but disruption in the gut, it can happen through medications, it can happen through antibiotics, it can happen through stress, it can happen through an infection or toxins, it can happen through gluten or GMOs or generally a bad diet. So there are a lot of things that can disrupt the digestive tract, okay, but we're just keeping it simple. So when these spaces are created in the gut lining, in the lining of the garden hose, it's what people may have heard referred to as leaky gut, but the actual term is increased intestinal permeability. And so now you have maybe poor digestion. Maybe that's caused the sensitivity, but the reality is your immune system in your blood is constantly fighting these foods that are coming in, okay? Now, our kids, they're eating 3 to 6 times a day. And so this poor immune system is constantly fighting foods. And so to the point that sometimes it misses maybe something else that comes through. So sometimes kids start getting sick more often. So you started with a food intolerance, and then maybe you've caused an immune reaction, and now maybe you're getting sick more often. And then what happens when your immune system is now fighting the food and fighting the virus, and it gets exhausted? And I don't know about you, but when I'm exhausted and I'm tired and I don't sleep, I get irritable, I get overreactive. And so sometimes that's what happens to our immune system too. And that may lead to the immune system attacking our own tissues. And that's how autoimmunity then may develop. It's one of the ways that autoimmunity develops. And that's what I think happened with my daughter. She was eating gluten that was causing a disruption in her gut that eventually activated her immune system. Her immune system was all over the place, and eventually it developed autoimmunity. Now, in her case, gluten is very well known to disrupt the brain as well. And in her case, it was actually attacking the tissues in her brain and destroying her nervous system, which is why we had the problem with the breathing. But so generally speaking, it's quite interesting to see how like something simple, like, not being able to digest the food properly can then lead to all these things. And if you think about it, like one of the most common medications that people take these days is antacid. Well, if you remove the acid, you're effectively removing some of the scissors that the body needs in order to digest. And so that over time, it's not going to happen from you taking it once, but over time, it may lead to lots of other things. And so I think it's also important for people to know that when they get a food intolerance test that has, 80 things that they can't eat on it, they're not allergic to these 80 things. They may be allergic to one or two, or maybe they're not digesting properly. But what happens is all of these things that they're eating are going through because of the balloons. And so that's what the test is showing you. And like you were rightly saying, what stays in what happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut. The gut is not like Vegas. And so quite often the symptoms of having a digestive issue or a sensitivity or an intolerance, they're like all over the place. So you have the common ones like the bloating and the abdominal pain and gas and constipation and all these, but you also have like fatigue and hay fevers and sinus infections and frequent illness and brain fog and asthma and weight gain, skin conditions, um, disruption in the thyroid. Some children get mysterious fevers that you don't know where they're coming from, and yet nothing is wrong with them. Some children have bedwetting till they're quite old, and quite often that's related to a food sensitivity. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, infertility for adults can often be linked to food sensitivities. It's amazing like how broad it can actually get.
Well, I think it's really, it's fascinating. And since I'm grown up and I think about my own life and the things that I avoid by choice because I feel better when I don't eat them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just something that I never got tested to see that if I had a sensitivity to it or anything. But I observed by paying attention, and which I think this is one of the first things we need to do is to observe. And when this happens, this result happens, and if it's a 3-day trajectory, well, then keeping a food diary is really helpful.
Absolutely.
And I can go back and say, oh, 3 days ago I had this. Now I have that. Let me see if I do it again, if 3 days later it happens again. Then I begin to create my own roadmap for what causes distress in my system, and I can begin to adjust. I mean, like, I know I laughed the other day. I had my movement friend on who's a dancer, and we were talking about sugar. And, she said she's working on her sugar addiction, and I just said, sugar is my drug of choice. It's been my drug of choice most of my life. I'm tired. I have some sugar. I get a boost of energy. Yes, I get a fast drop off. I know how to deal with it. I have more sugar. No, no. I have gotten this. It took me most of my life to get this under control, to manage it so that it's not causing me to yell at people I care about. It's not making me sick, because if I eat sugar, I choose not to eat other good foods. Oh, I did that when I was trying to be skinny as a dancer. No, this is where you have to really look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. You're right.
Because as a young dancer, and this my friend she said she gave herself a eating disorder. But you start to have pressure to look a certain way, to be a certain way for a certain sport or activity or thing. And what I did is I started to substitute sugar calories for protein calories because I did. I had to I was staying within a calorie band to keep the weight I wanted to be to dance, but I wasn't giving my body the nutrients it needed to survive. Yeah. And so fortunately, I ran into a good nutritionist early in my career. But it is amazing, the journey. And we eat all the time, and we have food all the time. We need food to live. And it's interesting that foods can also make us sick in the wrong proportions, the wrong balance, the wrong thing.
Yeah, and definitely.
I also think that it's wonderful, and a lot of what you have talked about is how paying attention, observing, the body will correct itself if you stop hurting it, right? Give it a chance to heal. And the other thing you said about antacids, it's like and this is what you did with your daughter, is they were giving you medicines to manage the symptoms, but managing the symptoms wasn't helping her to thrive.
No.
And so you went back to what's causing the symptoms. And so just taking an antacid, maybe this means I need to adjust. Maybe I need to look at my diet. What am I eating that's causing me to want to take the antacid? And what happens if I take that out?
Mm-hmm. And also the other thing is, it's not like in the same way that a medication is not the solution to everything, nor is nutrition. Healing is about so much more than just food and exercise. And I think people forget that sometimes. So if you look at how our kids are living, a lot of our kids, we're living stressed out lives. And we're passing that on to our kids. That's how they're learning to be. And unfortunately, that's not part of the healing path.
No, managing stress
So,
is
so managing stress, and I always talk to my client about sleep and making sure that kids have good sleep, because sleep deprivation depresses your immune system. It's not rocket science. When you sleep, your body repairs and grows, and kids need to do a lot of growing, so they need to sleep. And for us, the body sort of cleans up when you're asleep, so you need to do it to give the body a chance to sort of have a fresh start every day. And then I talk to them about rest, and they think that that's the same as sleep. I'm like, no, that's not the same as sleep. That's about spending time in nature and allowing yourself to be bored and just listening to music without doing anything else. And it's teaching your child that it's okay to do that. And some kids naturally want to do that, but other kids don't. They want to be like us. Some kids are very driven, and that's a beautiful thing. But you've got to fast forward to that type A adult that then is burnt out. And these are skills that we need to teach our kids. Some of our kids today, beautiful, they do lots of exercise, but excessive exercise also depresses the immune system, because what you're effectively doing when you're exercising is you're breaking the body down in order for the body to build itself back again. So what we're doing is we're doing excessive exercise without giving the body the fuel to rebuild, without giving the body the rest to rebuild, sometimes without giving the body the sleep to rebuild. And so suddenly something that's good can become something that's bad. And I think people forget, and it's not just about food, it's about drink as well. Hydration. We're mostly water, and yet most of us don't drink water. A lot of kids are growing up on juices and sodas or pop, whatever you call it. And that's, apart from the fact that it's full of sugar, it's not giving the body the fluid that it needs in order to do its job.
No, it's an amazing system, the body. And and what I keep hearing you coming back to is observation and awareness.
Yeah.
And, what happens, observing what happens, observing what you do, observing what happens, observing what you do, observing what happens. And this kind of awareness gives you information on all areas.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, you can't change something that you're not aware of. So awareness has to be the first step.
It does. Well, this has been just wonderful and so fun and so interesting to me. I do this because I learned so much. And I want to remind everybody that the way to connect with you is in the description. And this video will move into the healing path and be there. And there is a handout that Daniela made about nutrition in the healing path group. And if you have questions, you can type them on here, which is public, and you can share this with friends and family who you think would be happy to hear more about childhood nutrition. And Uh, and if you have private and personal questions, you can connect and ask a private personal question in an email or in a personal message, or however you want to do that. It doesn't all have to be public. I always feel like I want to say that because healing is
It
personal.
is. It's very, very personal. I feel very honored when people ask to work with me, because it is a very, very personal journey, and it's different for each and every one of us. You know, it's because it's not just about the food and the movement and the drinking. You know, there's actually been research done on this, and 80% of healing comes from, you know, the environment that we live in, our connections, our groups, and our lifestyle. And these are so many different things put together, and it is very personal to each and every one of us.
Yes, and so that's part of the reason I did the healing path with so many different spokes on the wheel, so that people can find the modalities and the information that resonates for them,
Yeah.
and put together their own journey,
Mm-hmm.
starting where it needs to start. Some people might need to start somewhere else. Some people might need to start with food. You're our second person
Oh,
talking about nutrition.
absolutely. You know, I have some clients that come in and they're like, "Well, don't ask me to give food up because I'm not going to." I'm like, "Okay, well,
Let's start with
what are you willing? What are you willing to do?"
food.
And we've got to, you know, you have to start where they're at. And sometimes, although food, most of the time, food is the way to get results quickest, but it's not always the first step. You know, it just happened to be what I decided to start studying.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your ideas and your information. And I will look forward to staying in touch and learning more.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It has been really good fun.
Great. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.